Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Just know that whenever this event is, there will be an atmospheric river, so just plan on it. Thank you so much for braving the storms this morning and joining your fellow winemakers for our favorite day of the year, actually. I think this actually beats premiere because it's a lot easier for us and a lot more fun. Welcome to our annual vintage celebration and winemakers tasting. We're thrilled to have you here. It's one of our favorite events of the year. I think it really is the favorite, because it is the culmination of harvest. We celebrate the end of harvest. We celebrate the vintage now in the making, and then we also kick off the holiday season. We started doing this, I think, back in 2017 or 18 or something, in lieu of a holiday party, and more in keeping with the theme of who and what the vintners are. So part of why we do this is to help foster something that is a beautiful part of Napa Valley's history, which is that culture of collaboration and camaraderie that our pioneers, our founders really got going, that you experience every day and especially during the harvest season. And we at the NVV take that seriously, that it's our role to also help nurture that. And that's what today is all about. This tasting, the juice bar this year reminds me of winemakers who inspire me. I think it's a pretty cool tasting. Can't wait to see the wines that you brought for that. And then a big family style lunch. Move things along quickly and then you can get back to work. But new this year, this was actually a fun idea that Connor had, which was to add a panel as part of that way of adding to that nurturing of the collaboration, but also a passing down of the history, making sure especially the next group of winemakers understand what it took to make Napa what it was. And I can't believe what a stellar lineup we have when this chapter of Napa Valley's history is written. These folks will all be in the history book for sure. An incredible lineup, and I'm going to introduce, they probably need no introduction, but it's an incredible lineup of people, and maybe especially for some of the newer winemakers, you don't necessarily know all about them. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Dawnine Dyer, who's the founding winemaker at Domaine Chandon, and led winemaking there for 25 years. She went on to be a consultant and a partner in other projects, including and has Dyer Vineyards with her husband, Bill, who I saw here in the audience. So there he is right there. And Dawnine also is a past chair of the NVV board. Sitting next to her, Andy Erickson, also a past chair of the NVV board. Andy came to Napa Valley in 1994-ish. And then he did a string of S's. He did Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, Spotswood, Saintsbury, Screaming Eagle. There's another one. There's another S. Well, no, we'll get to that. And then he ruined the S's and went to the H. He went to Harlan, and then in 2011 started his consulting company, and obviously has a great reputation for being a consultant for some of our most prestigious brands like Dalla Valle, Ovid, and others. And then, of course, with his wife Annie, has Favia down in Coombsville. And then we have Genevieve Janssens, who started out at Robert Mondavi Winery in 1978 as an enologist, then moved over to Opus One and was a director of production at Opus One for 8 years, and then went back to Robert Mondavi Winery in 87-ish, something like that, and was the head of winemaking there for years and years. She's still there as a guiding light, but has handed over the reins. And I think I saw Curtis in the audience, so it's nice to have him here. Genevieve, thank you so much. And then next to her is the rock star, literally, rock and roll band member Ed Sbragia at Beringer Vineyards for 32 years. And this guy is one of the few people, I haven't been able to figure this out, he might be one of the only people, he had 2 Wine Spectator #1 wines in the world. Quite the record. And then a few years ago started his own brand over in Sonoma, Sbragia Family Vineyards. Thank you, Ed, for coming over the hill, making it here with us. And then our moderator, someone who loves education and was a perfect person to help facilitate this, Nate Weis, who started out as a cellar rat at Groth. Wonder how you got that job. And then Went on, I think he worked at Etude and Patson Hall and some other brands, and then went over to Silver Oak and was the director of wine growing at Silver Oak for a number of years, and then just recently took the helm of BV as the general manager and director of winemaking there. We can't wait for it to open and to see what it's all about. Similarly, we can't wait to see Robert Mondavi reopen soon. We've got a lot of good things happening here next spring. Anyway, would you please join me in a big round of applause to say thank you to them. I can't wait to hear what they say. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate that very much. And I would like to add to my bio, because we have a little bit of celebrity jeopardy here today. So the apex of my leadership career was actually, I was 5th grade president at St. Helena Elementary School, circa 1989, and it's all been downhill from there. And also, I feel like I have to add one thing that Andy told me about his biography, which is that his crowning achievement was winning a blue ribbon in the science fair at Mary Feaser Elementary School in Elkhart, Indiana, 1976. So,
true story.
So if you can't come to the end of this thing and feel like you didn't learn something today. So, if you're here and you're in this room today, you're a member of a Napa Valley Vintner, you work for a Napa Valley Vintner member winery, and you've chosen to sort of take part in this crazy craft that we call winemaking and grape growing. And I think the use of the word craft's really intentional. I think what separates a craft from a vocation is that it requires a lot of creativity. You have to produce something. You've got to make something into something else. It takes a lot of technical skill and education, but it also takes a ton of experience. So I'm a big believer in the whole Malcolm Gladwell idea of 10,000 hours. And how do you do that, especially when you only do it once a year, right? You can go to school, you can learn phenolic chemistry, you can learn microbiology, you can have these things taught to you, learn them out of a book, plant physiology. But the real nuts and bolts of this is learned on the job. So, you're taking that knowledge, working with somebody that puts it into practice, watching that and learning that yourself really is how we get better at what we do, especially given we do it once a year. So I'd like everybody in this room to think back to what brought you here to the Napa Valley, what brought you to this profession, this crazy craft that we call winemaking. And then also think back, I would have a strong hunch, I suspect, that everybody in this room can think of one person in their career that really took the time to teach you and develop you. Like everybody's had a mentor, everybody's had somebody that sort of helped move them along and get them better at what they do. I can think of many in my career, some of which they took a lot of time and spent a lot of time with me. I can think of some, it was very short periods. And some, it wasn't even really about what we do or how to make a blend or how to decide when to pick. It was about how do you even approach what you do? How do you approach this as a teacher, as a mentor, as a developer of other people? So I've worked with a lot of you. I've known a lot of you for a long time. It's not going to surprise anybody. I'm going to be very vulnerable here because my boss is also in the room. So if I do come hat in hand after this, please give me a job. But I'm not that bright and I'm not that clever. I'm just not that smart. But I'm working with a new team now, and so every so often I'll sort of drop a little bit of these little nuggets of wisdom, right? And they're hearing it for the first time from me. A lot of people have heard it over and over and over. And the more I think about those things, the more it's sort of, a lot of these I stole from other people. If not all of these things I stole from other people, right? These are things that were told to me 25 years ago along the way. And the reality is probably they got stolen from other people in the first place. Some of these things may have been handed down from Andrei Chelichev or Joe Heitz or name your favorite, historic Napa winemaker. And that's really the beauty of what we do. I think that's kind of our oral tradition. It's our institutional knowledge as a valley. It's kind of our Rosetta Stone for deciphering what we do year in and year out. So we've got a long and beautiful history with wine growing and winemaking here in this valley. I think everybody in this room is now an owner and a steward of that, this beautiful history that we have as a valley. We've got our own culture, as Linda, you couldn't have set it up better. We've got this culture that it's going to evolve, it's going to sort of move and shake as we sort of make it, as we move forward. So with all of that stuff in mind, we assembled this panel today because it's sort of an all-star cast. They've got a lot of insight, they've got a lot of perspective about who we are collectively, what we value collectively, and the importance of learning, mentorship, development, all of those important things. And since this is an end of harvest celebration, what I'm really hoping is we get some great stories, maybe some you haven't heard before. There might be some you've heard a million times, some people in this room. Hopefully we'll have a few laughs and then get some insight in what it means to be in the wine industry here in Napa Valley and move forward as owners of this great legacy. So housekeeping is we will have some time for Q&A at the end. I think we've got about a little over an hour. Connor's here in the front row. He's got a microphone, but I suspect we'll get to that later. And Linda saved me the worries about introductions, so we'll just hop right in, and we'll start with the softball question, and we'll go in order here. So Andy, tell us about what brought you here to the Napa Valley. What attracted you?
Well, it's funny. I studied international relations and political science in my undergraduate years, and that did not bring me here. But I spent a summer in France when I was in school, and I was very lucky to live with a family that was very passionate about food and wine. And, we used to take the dining room table outside and pick out a few bottles of wine from their underground cellar, which I had never seen anything like that before. And I wanted to live like that. I didn't know what that meant, but I wanted to be connected to the land, and I wanted to be connected to food and wine. And then I moved to San Francisco right after college and started coming up this way to ride bikes and go wine tasting and whatnot. And then a few years in, it turns out my parents were sort of one friend group removed from Dick Grace and his family, and was invited to the harvest party that a lot of people probably remember when you used to get a couple bottles of wine when you helped Dick Grace pick grapes and make the wine. He turned it into you got a sandwich later on, but early on you got a couple bottles of wine. But anyway, I was lucky to come to that harvest party, and that sort of ignited this feeling in me, I want to figure this out. And I just found a way to move here, and I worked harvest at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. But really for me, it was wanting to live in this beautiful place and be part of this community. So I didn't even know if I'd become a winemaker at first. And I got lucky and fell in love with the production side, but that's what brought me here.
And I read in your bio that you started out in South America, in Chile and Mendoza, and actually Paul Hobbs helped bring you here to the
Napa Valley. I had a lot of friends in college who were from South America, from Argentina and Chile, and actually Agustin Huneeus was my neighbor in San Francisco right after college. So I had this idea that I was going to go to Chile for a year, but I never made it to Chile because I arrived in Argentina, and all my Argentine friends are like, "Nah, you're not going to Chile. You're staying in Mendoza." So I stayed in Mendoza for a year, and it's funny because everywhere I went in Mendoza said, "Oh, you're from California. You know Paul Hobbs?" And I said, "I don't know Paul Hobbs." And for months it was like, "Oh, you must know Paul Hobbs." I don't know Paul Hobbs. But on the crush pad during harvest, who shows up but Paul Hobbs? And he helped me get my first harvest job here in 1994. He was consulting at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, and now he's my neighbor, and he's still a good friend and mentor, and it's a great story.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Dawnine?
So a couple of decades before Andy got here. And by the way, I want to say, this audience is planted. We may throw some of these questions to you guys because there are half a dozen people I look out there and say, you should have been on this panel. You should have been on this panel. So we've got a nice mix. Bill and I arrived here in 1974 after spending a summer in Alaska. We had a couple of years of part-time work in a winery in Santa Cruz where we had both gone to school and had finally managed to completely escape. And we had lined up harvest jobs here for the harvest of 1974. I was lucky enough to have been hired by Zelma Long at Robert Mondavi, and it was a great vintage. We were very excited. There were not nearly enough qualified people for the jobs that were available in the Napa Valley, thus my success. You just had to kind of show up. But there was great excitement and enthusiasm about what was going on, and we knew we were going to make great wine in the Napa Valley. And it just kind of stuck. I mean, we were going to go back to graduate school. At one time, it was, law school or medical school or something like that. And ultimately, it was just another great job and another great vintage and another opportunity to experience and expand upon what we knew and felt about wine and winemaking and terroir and all those things that we came to later.
And you started with Chandon in 1976, correct?
That's right. In '74, I worked at Mondavi's for the harvest and stayed through the beginning of the year. Then I got a job at managing the lab at Inglenook. It was, in fact, your mother's job. And she did go back to school. And then from there, I went to Domaine Chandon as the building was being built, so the project was growing.
Well, for the more recent people that are newer to the Napa Valley, tell us of what Yountville was in 1976.
Well, Yountville in 1976 was the vet's home, a Greyhound bus station, and actually the diner. The diner was there in 1976. So it was a very small place, and the vet's home kind of ruled. In fact, we used to set up display racks, of riddling racks, and because because it was in a public area, we usually filled them with like a little water and bleach so that they looked good in there. And we did have a couple of vets that tried to open a couple of those bottles.
So it was self-evident Yountville was become a culinary capital of the world in 1976. Yeah, I love that.
It wasn't obvious.
A Greyhound bus station, the diner, and the vet's home, yeah, which obviously is still, Yountville's still very well known for the vet's home. Genevieve.
Okay, so I arrived here because I was graduated from Bordeaux, and at that time in Bordeaux, if you were a woman enologist, your future was in the lab, and that was not exactly what I wanted to do. I come from a family who always owned vineyards and wineries, and I wanted to continue that, trying to continue the legacy of my father. So I grew up since I was born with a father passionate with vineyard and wine and talking about just that at the table noon and evening. And he has influenced me quite a lot. That's why I went to Bordeaux and studied enologist, and I was supposed to come back to his winery and work for him. But unfortunately, there was something not right at that time in France. And it was just the time where he was visiting Robert Mondavi winery in the 70s. And he was very impressed by Mr. Mondavi, his knowledge, his passion of innovation. And he went to visit Napa Valley with a group of viticulture winery owners. And when he came back, he said, "Oh, you should go there just to learn more." And that was when I came in Napa Valley. And when I saw Robert Mondavi winery and Zelma Long, I talked to her for about an hour, and we enjoyed talking together. And she told me, if you're interested, you could come back. And I came back. And that was it. I didn't want to stay in France where women couldn't do anything else but just the lab. So that's my past, and that's why I'm here. And I have just one winery. Opus One, I consider it's a partnership between the French and the family, the Mondavi. But mainly, my passion was the vision of Mr. Mondavi and his understanding of the global vision of the wine, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we can't talk about the history of Napa Valley without talking about Mr. Mondavi. And so what specifically about his vision, his innovation, impressed your family and yourself so much?
Coming from where I was at the winery, I was an enologist and then a winemaker. I think what I enjoy the most with Mr. Mondavi is, first of all, his search of always being better. So we talk about Cherry Chef, but we can talk about Robert Mondavi. And his search forever trying to be better, which I enjoy that vision. He always wanted to give us the best tool to be better. That was his idea, and very generous, very nice, kind with the employees. And I appreciated that respect and the respect of women in the wine industry. I was very impressed by that. So that's mainly what drive me here. And I never had an idea to change another winery. I was happy where I was. And Tocalon, I started to work Tocalon in 78, which is quite a long time ago. And that was with the winemaker of Chateau Mouton Rothschild, who didn't want Baron Philippe de Rothschild to invest in Napa Valley. So he was very upset, not very happy, not speaking English. So I was the one who always receiving him, walking the vineyard and talking and translating. And I think this is something which always will stay with me. That was an impressive moment in my life, just to be able to see the birth of Opus One.
Was that a difficult situation given he'd been opposed to the investment?
No, he was a good guy. But he was from Pauillac, and in Pauillac you don't go anywhere else than just Pauillac. So in fact, maybe I did the same with Tocalon. I didn't go anywhere else than Tocalon, so maybe I had some connection here.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Ed?
I see a lot of friends out there. Hello, how are you? It's being back in Napa Valley. I grew up in Sonoma County, a farmer's son. My dad came over in the 20s, worked in wineries, ran sharecrop vineyards, and I grew up a farmer's son. He had made wine with my uncle, and he right after Prohibition in the 30s, and Depression did him in. So, growing up with a farmer who grew Zinfandel, I drank Zinfandel at home, and from a very early age. If you've ever been around an Italian family, it's suggested that you try wine somewhere after 5 years old, and so that was my beginning. And being a farmer's son, it's a lot of work, and I tried to get away. So I went to Davis, but went to the wrong department. I went to the chemistry department, and walked into the wine department, and I said, it smells funny in there. And I was used to the chemicals in the chemistry department. Luckily, my first job was with Gallo as a research chemist. I had GCs and all sorts of stuff to play with, and I got the bug just because I worked with a guy named Marcello Monticelli. If anybody knows Marcello, he's a good guy. And I was convinced to go back to school and get a master's at the other winemaking school at the time, Fresno. Now there's more people teaching enology around. And I was lucky to get a job right back home in Healdsburg, where I've always lived, at a little winery called Fopiano. And then a friend of mine, a guy named Pat Heck, who I played in a band with for a long time, was working as an enologist, and he said, they're looking for assistant winemaker, and I'm not going to get the job, so why don't you come over and interview? So I came to work for a guy named Myron Nightingale. Guy K entered, most of you know who Guy K was, and got the job at Beringer, and never left. I stayed there for 32 years. I left in 2008 and went to work with my son in Sonoma County, and we started a little winery. The thing to put it in perspective about us as winemakers, I mean, we didn't hoe every vine. We didn't pump over every tank where we were. It was a bigger winery. So a lot of these accolades that we got at Beringer was because all of us, it was a family. Now my son looks at me and he says, Dad, my best way to explain you is you're a has-been. So I'm glad I'm on this panel. Thank you.
You proof point today. You can say, no, I'm still here, man. I'm talking in front of other winemakers. They want to hear what I have to say. So something that's very near and dear to my heart that I'd love to ask each of you is, we talked a little bit about mentorship, developing other people, who you learn from, on-the-job training. When you first started in the Valley, who'd you look up to? Like, who helped shape you as a winemaker in your philosophy and the way you approached what you did?
Well, we already talked about Paul Hobbs, but Paul was really like a introduction to Napa Valley, and he is also everywhere all at once still. Like, he doesn't sit still in Napa Valley. So he helped me get settled here, but I worked harvest in Napa Valley in 1994 at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. And then after harvest, someone said, oh, there's at Newton Vineyard, they're looking for a cellar worker, or the guy's going back to Europe, whatever. So go up to the hill and ask for John Consgard. And I was just very lucky in November 1994 to meet John Consgard. I mean, the guy is, you know, I mean, he just thinks about wine in a very holistic way. I mean, it's part of life. It's part of nature. It's connection to the land. It's, you know, and his philosophy of just being connected to the vineyard and connected to the wine, but not really treating it like a science. I mean, it's something that really has stayed with me. And I've been very lucky as well. Like, so I worked a couple of harvests, and then I got a job at Séguin Moreau, the cooperage, before I went back to UC Davis. And that was a really interesting time because my job was, the barrels were really on allocation, but my job was to go around and meet with all these people. I mean, I met Genevieve 30 years ago, and your dad, and Tom Rinaldi, and Kathy Corson. I mean, my job was to just go and sit with these winemakers and taste wine with them and act like I knew what I was talking about. And it was really amazing. So I was very spoiled to meet many of the generation before me and get perspective from them. So I'm very spoiled in that regard. So,
If I can interject quickly, you know, the first time I ever encountered Andy was when he was with Staglin, probably 2003-ish, 2002, something like that. Because I used to pretend like I was working at the Festival for Mental Health, but immediately get from behind the table, walk around, taste a bunch of wines. And he was a guy that we all looked at as people just getting started. And like, here's Andy Erickson. He's got stuff figured out. He's like 30 years old. He's having a great time making these beautiful wines at Staglin. So Andy was definitely a guy I looked up to really early in my career.
So my first job in Napa was Zelma Long at Robert Mondavi, and I would echo many of the things that Genevieve has already said about just kind of that vision and leadership that the whole winery team there took. But Zelma, who is still a very good friend and I guess still a mentor, she leads the way in many things, had taken this very scientific approach to something that then became aesthetically really important to her, and to see that kind of integration of the detailed orientation of a scientific endeavor with the aesthetics of what we now think of as modern winemaking. And then 2 years later, when I was hired at Domaine Chandon, it was by Edmond Maudière, who at that time was chef de cave at Moët et Chandon. And he was my mentor and for 25 years, and then good friend until he passed away a couple of years ago. A man of many talents, loved to fly, so I got a bird's eye view of much of the vineyards in both the Napa Valley and in Champagne, but also just one of those really rare individuals who was curious about everything. And he was a native born Champenoise, and so he knew that land, but he was so curious about the Napa Valley, and always playful, and always kind of looking at things from a slightly different angle, like, oh, I'm not sure I would have thought of it that way. And then because the unspoken here about women in winemaking roles, which I think has changed so dramatically in that 40 years, but Edmond was the father of 4 girls. 2 of them were older than me, and 2 of them were younger than me. And whenever there was any kind of issue that I was addressing, that I was confronting in that that world. One of his daughters would have gone through something similar. He was an incredible champion, and I have always been a fan of fathers of daughters. I think that I think it's a very special relationship, and when harnessed to this kind of professional development, is one of our most effective tools.
As the father of a 17-year-old daughter, it's special indeed at the moment, yes. It's a whole new world for me. And was it hard for you to go from Robert Mondavi to learning method champenois and sparkling wine?
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, it's not really obvious because you, as difficult as tasting wine sometimes straight from the fermenter or right after malolactic, as we're all going to be doing today, the base wines are still several steps away from the finished wine, several steps and several years. And the chemistries all change with that secondary fermentation. You suddenly have more acidity. So you make the wine in steps for sparkling wine. And I think it really takes, you just have to have the time to see it yourself. I mean, you can walk through the steps. Pauline, you know that. You need to actually see it, not just understand it intellectually. So it's a hard transition. It's actually much easier to go the other direction.
So continuing my journey with Mr. Mondavi. So the first person who was a mentor was my father, and then after that, Mr. Mondavi. But I didn't see too much of him because he was busy somewhere, not at the winery. But definitely, Tim Mondavi, Michael Mondavi were very much involved, and I appreciated all their kindness. And Tim had a vision extremely precise on winemaking, and he taught all of us to follow the vision of his dad, who wanted to be the closest. He was very admiring the French way of winemaking. And so coming from the Bordeaux winemaking and my professor of the past teaching me how to make wine and Bordeaux Reds, I have that people mentoring, this family mentoring me. But in addition to that, I think the entire winemaking team was mentoring me. I did not grow up alone. I grew up in a total team, and the team spirit of Robert Mondavi Winery was huge. And I think now I always ask me what is a mentor? But a mentor is somebody who continues you to progress and make better wine and quality wine, and you feel then because of that person helps you to grow is a mentor. So at the present time, I have a young friend, Curtis, who is my mentor at the present time because he's showing me a different way of making the wine than I didn't do in the past, but I admire the quality of the wine he's making. So I think mentors are all your life around you, and you just have to pick and choose what that person can teach you.
Yeah, I love that. Still learning. I think that's one of the things about this craft is we're going to do that forever. As long as you do this,
yes,
you're going to keep learning.
Yes. As long as you find them.
So having grown up with a farmer who had made wine, he was pretty good. And I watched him make it, and his technique came from Italy. He made wines in a very simple way. Actually, he didn't even take the stems off, which I did later on with Pinot Noir. And it made pretty aggressive zins that actually, when an Italian makes wine, pretty 6 months out, he's drinking it already. From a barrel to Damajans to, we used to call them fifths, 750s, and into the refrigerator, and totally stable. So I'm looking at winemaking when I got to Napa Valley. The winemaker I went to work for and who is my mentor was a guy named Myron Nightingale. He and his wife became famous for making a wine called Premier Semillon in the 50s, which was a induced botrytis wine. And later on, we duplicated it and called it Nightingale. So you kind of working for somebody who was, in the textbooks. And he had been making wine when I started in 1976 for 30 years, and had made wine in Argentina. And so he was truly a mentor. At the same time, I took what my father taught and blended them together with less manipulation. We used to bentonite reds and do a lot of things, a lot of filtration, when my dad just put them in barrels. So I started doing that and did it for 32 years, and it kind of still works. They seem to take care of themselves. He taught me how to make whites. His wife used to call him Old Burrhead. I mean, one of the nice things about Myron is someone came new into the lab, he would take him out to lunch, learn about who they were, where they came from, and became a mentor for a lab worker. So being an assistant winemaker, I got a lot of his time. And I think one of the interesting stories, I remember early on, you think, well, he knows everything. So I ran into a problem during harvest, which I can't remember much anymore. And ran into him and wanted the answer in 15 minutes, and I wanted to leave. And he kind of scratched his head and said, Ed, I never ran into it again before. And I went, wow. And I was pissed off at him because I wanted to be able to fix it right away. But we finally came up with an answer, and it worked. But you never stop learning. As Jean-Vian says, I'm still learning. As being kind of helping my son make wine in Sonoma County, every year is so different. It's a challenge, and that's what keeps us in this business.
And that's what I see on this panel is, part of the reason you're here is this humility to admit that you don't know everything, right? It may catch people by surprise. They may even be disappointed, but none of us know everything. We're always continuing to go on this journey, and being able to admit that, especially in people that are working for you, it's a huge trust building opportunity, right?
Well, you told me I had to admit it. Normally I wouldn't.
All right, let's shift gears really quick. Just remember this is being filmed. So craziest or funniest harvest story, appropriate for future posterity.
Well, we were talking about this before people arrived, and I have way too many stories of since I first arrived here where something went wrong and I was involved, and I'm not going to tell those stories, but I do have a funny story, which is about 15 years ago at a winery that won't be named, but it's on Pritchard Hill, and Austin Peterson is the winemaker now. But this was early when we started harvesting grapes at night, so over the years we decided that the best thing was to harvest the grapes in the middle of the night and deliver them to the winery door. So we decided, okay, we're going to start harvesting at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that way everything will be ready when the sun comes up, and we'll start sorting the grapes when the sun comes up. So I decided, okay, I'm going to drive up there because I want to be there while they're picking the grapes. Why I needed to be there, I don't know, but I thought I had something to add. So I get in my car. It's like a 45-minute drive from Napa. I arrive right before 3 a.m., and the vineyard crew is not there. And I think, okay, what's going on? So I go over to the winery, and all the fruit is stacked up at the front door of the winery, perfectly labeled, and they were very busy, so they just decided to pick it, at 2 o'clock and leave it there for us. And so I'm there at 3 o'clock in the morning by myself on the top of Pritchard Hill, and I think I went inside, and luckily there was a couch I slept on for a little while. But I guess the lesson is trust the vineyard crew, and if you don't, then be prepared to sleep in your truck, and there are many other fun stories, but that's one I like.
Well, if there's one piece of advice I have to everybody, it's always find a nap spot, wherever you're actually working, there's always a great nap spot somewhere, and identify that early.
Because there's always a lag somewhere, something that you're going to have to wait for. Yeah, so we did talk about all of these things, all of the, opening the valve on the wrong tank, leaving the lid on when you pump out, all of those things, the roto tank during harvest, rotating with the door open, those... All of those things have happened, and we probably all can go like this. My big story is Bill and I started making wine from the vineyard that we planted on Diamond Mountain in '96. And we had a sweet deal with relatives who would frequently come up on the day of harvest. And we had a crew that picked, and then they would help us get it into the winery, and we would have a nice party. 2006, how many of you remember 2006? A year that had a lot of rain at the wrong time. Heat, cracked berries, rain, penicillin. And 2006 was just kind of at the beginning of sorting. So we didn't really know what we were doing with sorting, and we didn't really have a long enough lead time to do it. And we had, like 4 relatives who had agreed to help. Oh, this is fun. And they show up in the morning, and about 11 o'clock at night, when we finished, we had cheese and crackers. Everybody went to bed, and it's the last time I've seen a family member here at Harvest.
You can always get them once. Yeah, volunteers come once.
So I thought about this question, and I think through my career as a winemaker at Robert Mondavi Winery, the only thing which was very important for me, not always fun, it was to fight with the top management when they were forcing me to harvest a vineyard, which I don't think I have done ever, but I had to push back. So that will be a recommendation for all the winemakers. When you know that this is the right time, you pick your fruit. But when somebody from the top management behind a computer doesn't understand anything about the vineyard, asks you to pick because it can be very dangerous. I think the winemaker needs to be strong and just push back. And my best example is 2011, when the weather was very poor and raining. And I took some risk, definitely, pushing a vineyard. And after that, after the harvest, the wine was superb, so I was pretty pleased, but it was very difficult just to arrive to a certain balance and happiness in the teams. It was difficult. So that's my little words here.
Do you have advice about pushing back in a positive and productive way?
Yeah, I think you need to be careful and discussing and explaining clearly your intention and not taking too many risks, because it's not a good idea, but at the same time evaluating the beauty and what you can gain and lose. So always discussing with the people who would like you to pick. I think communication is huge in winemaking at all levels. So that will be my recommendation.
I think I have to go way back. And one of the things that Genevieve talked about was, being close to the vineyard. I think that's what it is. And without it, it's probably 90% of what a good wine is. And we don't have that much if you're dealing in the quality that most of us deal with. I worked with a guy named Bob Steinhauer. And anybody who knows Bob, we used to call him the Tasmanian devil, because he'd come in and scale house, spin around, and be gone. And a lot of stories about Bob, but I'm not going to tell them right now. But I think that the harvest that just stuck in my brain, and I think you always remember the bad things, and the good ones kind of float away. And 1979 was probably the first harvest from hell. It rained the whole time, and we were sending Cabernets off to be distilling material. The worst one was 1989. I mean, the demons were all after us. There were 15 inches of rain that year, which is not enough. And we got 5 inches during bloom. So it was a screwed up bloom, and the set was bad. And then we got 10 inches during harvest, spread out. I mean, if you were adventurous, you picked it early. I sent grapes out to get concentrated and add the concentrate back so I could still have a vineyard designate. And the wine turned out pretty good. And, you know, you do your best in situations like that. But the demons were after us, and Mother Nature just kind of slaps you around and says, I'm the boss. And you're doing what the best you can. And I think that always happens. It's something that you kind of search on how you can make that best wine any particular year, and it's not always easy.
Not to mention 1989 Loba Prieta in the tail end of harvest, right? The earthquake. And worst of all, the Giants lost the World Series that year.
That was horrible.
Okay, how would you say, Andy, how has your winemaking philosophy changed over the years, and how have you seen it change in general here in the Valley?
Well, I don't remember reading that question in the provided questions, but I'll roll with it. First of all, I want to send a shout out to Jessica Tarpi Shaheen, who's been working with me for 18 years now, and she's now our director of winemaking at Favia, and so we work really closely together. And I guess the philosophy has always been very focused on the vineyard. And so we spend as a team a lot of time in the vineyard with Annie, Favia, my wife as well. And, you know, hoping that when the fruit arrives at the winery, you know, the work is done and we're just making sure that everything kind of sails through smoothly. So I think we've always kept to that. What I think is great now is that the vineyards that we started with are now 25 years old. And so, you know, the early years, it's kind of hard to wrangle those young vines into the wines you might want to make. And now I feel like, you know, we're just really taking that character from the vineyard and ushering it into wine and trying not to intervene too much. But that's always been our philosophy. We've probably reined things in a bit, not as much new oak, and not as ripe, which this year we can all agree was not that hard. And it's funny too, because every year is so different. I mean, when you're prepared for a heat wave, all of a sudden it's the coolest vintage on record, right? Or if you're ready for some issue, it's some other issue. So the philosophy is great, but it's, you know, it's like the Mike Tyson thing. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. So
I was wondering if that
we're
quote
getting
was
punched in the mouth every year, and we just deal with it.
I was thinking about that quote just the other day, actually, and I couldn't agree more. After 2022, I remember setting all sorts of experiments and trials up with shade cloth and misters and running overhead sprinklers, and then 2023 didn't use a single bit of it. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things we really need to talk about first is just how much has changed in the world of equipment, and how much of that is related to the luxury that we have on pricing. So the margins in the Napa Valley wines have made it possible to really accelerate that kind of evolution. But I think about 1974, all grapes were delivered in 3 to 5 to 10 ton gondolas. The idea of a small picking bin, let alone the half-ton bins that we now consider ubiquitous, was not a thing. The equipment, the presses, the pumps, everything was geared to, they were workhorse pieces of equipment, but the subtlety of oxygenation and not shearing seeds and skins was something that we just really didn't have the luxury of doing. We also, I think, in the 70s, were looking at wine cultures, and we're always sort of saying we're going to make wine like they do in Bordeaux, or we're going to make wine like they do in Burgundy. And to me, I think the biggest recognition was the aha moment many years ago now, but the aha moment that we're making wine in Napa Valley, and that this is really important, that we understand our terroir and how grapes respond in us. We might be no more different than Saint-Emilion and Margaux, but we are a very specific place, and you can drill down. It was certainly something that we had in mind when we bought what we thought was 4 plantable acres, and it turned out to be 2.5. But what the hell? But that real focus on the land, the specific soil, getting the match right between rootstock and clone. I suspect that the future of all of this is still going to be absolutely grand, because as much as we want to preserve older vineyards, we have so many vineyards that have really now only been planted one time. And, a vineyard, what we learn in the first lifetime or the first iteration of a vineyard, we love the age of our vines and what that brings to the wines that we make. But there are a million things that I would change subtly were we to have the opportunity, another generation, to make those changes. So I think there's an incredible future for us in terms of continuing to improve the qualities of the grape material and the wines that we make. And I think that really is it. I'd like to just kind of point out some of the things. We talk about the fact that you can only make wine once a year. And that certainly is true. So by the time you get to, did you tell me it was my 50th vintage? 51st? You've had a chance to actually learn a vineyard, see it in different vintages, understand kind of what you can push and what you can't. Now I lost my train. But gone. See, I told you have to write it down.
Well, I can hop in with a story I was told about Justin Meyer as to the advances in technology and different things that become the norm. And this must probably in the 80s, he had a grower show up and was delivering in gondolas, and the grower was very proud. On the back of the flatbed, he had a few picking lugs full of leaves and just detritus, stuff that they had sorted out. And he was very proud to show Justin, we sorted all of this stuff out as we were picking the grapes. We're really quality focused and great. And so they dumped all the gondolas. And as the grower left, I was told Justin basically picked up the lugs and dumped them right into the hopper with everything else. Jean-Pierre?
I think it's hard to talk after Dawnine because I think you cover quite a lot, but definitely the evolution and the knowledge and the research in the vineyard and at the winery with new equipment in the vineyard, new ideas, and the evolution of the society, the consumers being very sensitive to chemicals. All of that shaped the wine industry in Napa Valley and everywhere in the world. So every winery will have their own history of evolution. What I see now is smaller lots, more bottling for direct to consumer. So marketing has a huge impact. When I started at the Robert Mondavi Winery, it was big lots, big bottling, but it's less and less in this view. And so I think when I read your question, I went to ChatGPT, and I asked your question to ChatGPT, and the answer was excellent. So I encourage everybody to go there because we could spend our life talking about the evolution of the winemaking, but ChatGPT did a good job. So, and I have it here, so I won't show you, but pretty well done.
I suppose that's something that's changed over the years as well, the advent of AI and how we're going to use it.
Yes.
Well, there's not much more to say. If we go back to the 60s, Bank of America did a review of vineyards in Napa Valley, and they said plant Cabernet. So we did. My first year, I had 1,000 tons of Cabernet in Gamble Ranch, which is mid-valley, and it was horrible. And quickly over the years, we realized that, like for instance, we had a vineyard, the old Jaeger Ranch, and it had Zinfandel, Chardonnays, Grignolino, Riesling, Charbonneau. I mean, everything was planted in every block, pretty much everywhere. I mean, right next to the Cabernet was a block of Chardonnay, which turned out great at Gamble Ranch. I did for years, still do, if I can get it. And over the years, phylloxera kind of was, there was a silver lining to phylloxera in the 80s. We pulled everything out and planted again, and we had a pretty good idea where things should go, and we made some mistakes. But over the years, as vineyards got older, we learned to put the right grape in the right place. And that's where I think smaller lots came into play, and that we were able to keep things so you made something that was very indicative of that particular vintage and that particular soil. And that's kind of what I ended up doing, is making wines of place. That two Cabernets sitting side by side from two different vineyards, almost 2 miles apart, are different. They taste different. And that was what intrigued me and kept me in this business. It made me excited about walking the vineyards and tasting the grapes, and having been a chemist, play with all the numbers, and as I've slowly forgot about all those numbers, but I used to know them. And as time went on, we made better and better wines by doing that. And I think that is what I saw, the difference over time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ed. Penultimate question before we go to Q&A. And Ed, you kind of alluded to this, that it takes a team, right? You can't do this without the cellar crew. In many cases, you can't do it without people that come seasonally, assistant winemakers, cellar masters. There's a whole group of people that are really important to the success of a particular vintage. And it's a very busy, very crazy time of year, unpredictable. How do you keep the mood light? How do you keep people engaged during harvest?
Well, I'm going to have a different question in a few years because we're breaking ground on a new winery for Favia in the spring, and I'm really excited to create the culture that I've been imagining for a long time. We've been living sort of a vagabond winemaking lifestyle for many years, and that has its own challenges. But so for me, I'm the guy kind of in and out, lending advice and doing things here and there. But I always describe, because I have run a crew before and been at the same place all through harvest, and my feeling is I always equate it with you're setting sail on a voyage together, right? You have the crew you're going to have, you have the ship is setting sail. So keep yourself organized, keep everybody clean. Keep everything clean, keep the people well fed, and everybody in good spirits. I think a way to keep people in good spirits is just to have them take ownership of what they're doing and feel like, they're really part of something that's exciting. And also, like, if something goes wrong in the winery, which it always does, like, especially with the interns, I say, please just tell somebody. If you open a valve and several hundred gallons come out of a tank, like, we don't want to figure this out 2 months from now when we fill like a third of the amount of barrels that we thought we were going to fill from this tank, right? So not getting upset with people when something goes wrong, but just having those stories, because I have those stories, like pumping one tank onto another tank and not realizing until everything starts flowing out the top that, like, wait a minute, something's not right here. I think sharing your experience with the younger people who are coming in and letting them know that, like, this is a craft, this is agriculture, this is something that's, it's physical and real, and also just having a sense of humor. I feel like after 32 harvests, I've almost seen it all, but I guess I haven't, because every year it's something different. But just rolling through things when things are not perfect. It just keeps everybody smiling. I don't know. I have a lot of fun during harvest, and it's not always easy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly what's done is done, right? Mistakes get made. You can be mad about it. You can yell and scream, or you can just let it roll off, right? You can go home and yell and scream later.
In my eyes, as long as no one gets hurt, I mean, we're not running a medical unit here. We're making wine, which should be enjoyable and exciting for everyone. So, I don't know. I agree. Keep it fun.
One word, how to keep a team together and working food. Feed them. Let everybody sit down together and enjoy that. It can be very high-minded. It can be a sandwich. It can be pizzas. But feed them. Make sure they're well fed and that they have a chance to unwind a little bit. And then I thought of the other thing that I was going to say, so I'm going to back up if that's all right. That in terms of things that have changed, that I think are really have been made a big impact on my thinking about wine. The 50 years threw me off, but it's the opportunity that we have now with this world of international interns. The fact that there is a whole group of people who are carrying wine knowledge around the world, from Italy to South Africa to Argentina to New Zealand to Chile to California, that it really gives the winemakers of today, I'm sure there are many of you out there who have done this, to have 3 harvests in a year as opposed to just 1, and to have an ongoing dialogue with people who are having similar experiences. I think I saw an incredible jump in terms of the comprehension and the kind of experimentation that we did when that started to happen. I'd also say that in Napa, it really was not that long ago that we started the AVA system, or that we began to participate in the AVA system with TTB, and I think that has given us a place to hang the information on individual vineyards and typicity that's a little better. And then I think another one that I think for many of us was a real opportunity is the introduction of the Type 2 licenses that allow you to be a vagabond winemaker, to develop a brand without quite the same investment that bricks and mortar takes. Okay, I know I blew that all completely up.
I agree. Yeah, the barriers to entry are never lower, while at the
Yes.
same time they're also never higher than they are
exactly.
right now. And I think feeding one another, it's good advice in marriage as well. Yeah. I once did a dinner with a Korean chef, and she explained that in her culture, cooking for somebody is an act of love. It's how you show love to somebody else. And I think, especially if the cellar crew cooks for one another, and the interns or the winemaker even, that especially sort of shows a special amount of care and preparation and a lot of love.
Yeah, if you can fire up that barbecue while the last fruit's coming in, and yeah, that's good.
You don't have to wait that long, of course. Genevieve, how do you keep the crews happy?
First of all, a clear direction, and we need to communicate quite a lot about the vision. We need to test wines all together so they understand exactly what we are looking for as winemaker, and of course based on the past, and then explain very well the vintage, how the winemakers are seeing it. And I think communication and happiness and joy and support, be very patient. Sometimes you need a lot of psychology, and communication between vineyard, cellar, and winemakers is the essence. So meetings every day to really think about what is today, what are we expecting, what is the future. So communication is a key point. And then, no doubt about that, food is very important for everybody. And what I have noticed in the past, a long past, is winemakers are getting very early in the vineyard and testing sugar, a lot of sugar. So 3 hours later, they have a total crash. And we don't want to see a winemaker depressed. So you feed them, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think it's a great point that talking with the people that are working for you, because I remember back in my first few harvests, I worked, and then people would say, "Well, how was the vintage?" I have no idea. Actually, I haven't even asked the winemaker. Is this a good one, a bad one? We see the fruit come in, we clean the press, we do stuff like that. But the idea that the winemaker, as the harvest is going through, sharing what they're seeing and what they think with the crew is important.
I think probably the most important thing that for me is to be with your people, to know who they are, kind of as much as they're willing to share, and catch things that, when their birthday is, when they have a problem, in my case at Beringer, where there was an HR department and their hours went right, you made sure they were right and fixed it for them. I think catching people do something right, you need to get them to tell them that right away while they're doing it, not at the review 6 months later. And I think truly caring about the people and actually working with them. I'd show up in the middle of the night because somebody was sick and ran a press for a couple hours. I mean, I had fun because I'm a production kind of guy, but I think it kind of shows that you're willing to be there with them, and I think that's key.
I love that. Catching people doing things right. I love that. How are we doing on time?
We have about 15 minutes.
Oh, perfect.
So we have time for questions.
All right, then we have one final question for you, which is if you could give advice to yourself as a much younger person when you were starting out, what would you tell yourself? What do you know now that you wish you knew when you first started in the wine business? We don't have to start with you, Andy, if you want a second.
That sounds great here.
I actually thought about that question. That's a hard question to answer because I think every step of the way in this journey has been pretty enjoyable and has had lessons in it. So I'm not convinced that there was any one thing that would have set me off on a different course or prepared me for the course that I was on any better. But I do think that that how to ask questions is probably one of the things that that the intellectual process that you go through when you're in discovery is something that I think we maybe overlook. The why question. And I would just kind of come back to the early times when we were looking for all the answers in Europe, not thinking that there were necessarily things that we might know here specific to our fruit, which I think we do, is that tradition will never be able to answer the question why. And we are very good at asking the question, why? And I think that why question is something that if you maybe understand early on that this is going to be critical to you long term, you'll get to those answers maybe a little bit more quickly. But it took me years to kind of realize that there's a difference between tradition and innovation. We've been pretty good at the innovative part when push comes to shove, but it's understanding that relationship, I think maybe that should be taught at the enology school.
Challenge the process, and this is the way we've always done it, it's not an answer.
So if I try to remember my past and what I would have been happy to do, and I did it but not enough, is to test wines from other wineries of the Napa Valley and meet the winemakers, invite the winemakers at the winery to share. So put time in our busy schedule because we are so busy and we don't see the big picture all the time. That will be my recommendation. We should slow down regularly and share with the community and take the time and test a lot of international wines to understand exactly what is the future, to understand better where are we going. So definitely I wish I will have tested even more than what I did, because I did work instead of stopping, thinking, and enjoying the wine and understanding what is behind the wines, each wines.
One of the things that my old mentor used to say is, to thy own self be true. I used to say, what the hell does that mean? And my father-in-law said it a little more correctly. He said, you know what's right, do it. And then he said, pass the salt. But anyway, I think that a lot of times you got to pull the trigger, and there are all sorts of conflicting ideas coming at you in terms of how you should make the wine. And I think you know in your heart of hearts, you have to make yourself happy before you can make anybody else happy. So you have to enjoy what you're doing immensely to keep on this business. And it's still a lot of fun. And I'm trying to figure out what's right. And I'm doing it.
Well, I think what I would say to my young self is take every single opportunity you can to taste wines, to taste grapes, to just taste everything, because that's really what this is all about, is what goes into the bottle, right? So I love tasting fruit in the vineyard, and I would say for a young person, if you're out sampling, don't just gather the samples, taste the grapes. You know, taste every barrel in the cellar. If you're racking the barrels, you should be doing that anyway, but you know, taste every single wine that's available to you. And I can remember in 2017 when we had the fires, I remember walking outside my house on the way to the winery, and there was so much ash on the windshield, and I was like, huh. I took my finger on the windshield and I put it under my gums to see what that would taste like. By the way, it tastes terrible. But I think now, even in the vineyard, when you see some blue mold, you might just taste that. What does that taste like? You know, what does a high VA wine taste like? Taste that, you know, just I don't know. I think tasting grapes, tasting wine, do it as much as you can.
Love it. And the nice thing about being the moderator is I don't have to answer any of the questions. This one I would love to answer, because I think what I would tell myself 25 years ago is that your vision as a winemaker and what it is you see, it's worthless unless you can actually bring people along with you. And you can actually have them see that vision. Now, we talk about the culture that you want to build in your own facility. And, you know, it takes a whole team to do anything. And you can be off, you know, we're going to make a 100-point wine. We're going to do the very best wine ever made. And if nobody's coming along with you, it's not going to happen. And in fact, you're going to fall flat on your face. So, Connor, we're opening up to Q&A from the audience.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Please wait for the microphone so that we can capture it on the audio. Tough question first.
No, this one's for Ed. I remember we had exchange visits with our crews maybe 30 years ago, and at the time we had a discussion about what's the right time to pick Cabernet, what levels of maturity. And then in ensuing decades, the concept seemed to change a little bit, but I'm just wondering about your thoughts specifically about Cabernet and grape maturity.
Right. I think you look at it from the point of view, in my case, and for my palate to make me happy, I like a big wine. And if you're trying to make a supple, soft Cabernet, you don't want to pick them at 27, 28. But picking them at 22, I didn't get the color or tannin that I wanted. So over the years, I mean, we used to pick them at 24, and that was high. And then it went to 25 and went to 26. But I think a lot of that had to do with when we went to VSP and drip irrigation, the vines were healthy. The grapes weren't ripe yet. So we ended up You run around, like Andy says, chewing berries and seeds and seeing if they're green and how ripe the seeds are. Are you getting any color? What the stems look like? Are the leaves turning brown? Or are they starting in senescence and it's all vine saying it's all done? So I'm a 26er now.
That's up more than when we talked for a year.
Well, you and I had a little bit different ideas.
You talked about working with your team, maintaining good morale in the cellar and keeping people really engaged. The question that I have, and it goes back to when I transitioned from home winemaking into commercial winemaking a few years ago. And I was working on the cellar floor and I get the work orders, add this much water, add this much acid, so on and so forth. To what degree do you take the time to explain to the people that are doing the work why you're doing what you're doing? What was your starting point? What do you want your end point to be? And therefore, here are my calculations that allowed me to arrive at what I'm asking you to do as far as an addition or anything else you're asking them to do in the cellar. Could be, when do you do a mid-firm or a midday punch down or pump over, right? Why are you doing it? How common is that?
I'll jump in. I think I always start with sort of a basic protocol, and I have written a lot of these over the years for winemaking, different varieties, different vineyards, and I think that protocol usually, it's got the practical steps like, are we going to add commercial yeast? Are we not going to add commercial yeast? Or how are we going to add the nutrients? What are we seeing as a trend in the year? But I think making that information available and certainly having a meeting prior to starting the harvest that says, this is what we're seeing, this is the wines that we have made, this is the wine that we want to make. These are our resources, our tools, and this is how I'm going to apply them here is really important. And I think it's a good discipline. I actually started doing it with custom crush kind of work where you're always in a new situation or sometimes in a new situation, and that you need to communicate that to a new crew or a different crew. But it's a good discipline, actually, to write a protocol and then to share it with the people who you're working with.
I guess my answer would be not enough. I feel like, especially in the heat of harvest, it's hard to take time and really, explain to someone why you're doing something. But it's a good question. And, now that we're creating our new winery, it would be nice to have that kind of culture where you at least maybe one time a day talk about what's been going on and whatnot. But for me, I think I'm guilty of not doing that enough.
Okay, we'll take one last question from here in the back.
A question: after the fires of 17 and 2020, do you see winemakers possibly maybe not being a 26er and pulling those sugars back a little bit, harvesting a little bit earlier, and maybe changing the philosophy of the ripeness of the fruit in lieu of possible fires?
Well, I think you learn. And like this year, if you picked early, you had Cabernet. If you waited, you don't have Cabernet. You brought it on you. So what do? Mother Nature just throws it at us all the time. She's not always friendly. I can keep on singing that song. But I think you have to decide, like you have a protocol, what you do in the crusher, what you do in the winery. And at a certain point, he's talking about adding water. Well, we can add water to a certain point so we don't have stuck fermentations. So it goes on both sides where it's really I remember 2006 where everything turned to raisins and you had to pick early or else you were going to not have any crop. You have just to hang with Mother Nature and do the best you can.
Well, I think that to some extent, I think the discussion has changed a little bit. I personally am glad to see us pulling back from some of the real extreme high sugars that I think can make very showy wines, but sometimes don't give you as much varietal impact as we might like to have. And if you're spending that much time and energy on a good site and the vineyard practices, you should want all of that fruit to be evident in the bottle. But I think if I could point it towards the fires, which I think was a good reason for a lot of people to think that maybe saying there's no hurry, why not wait and see what we can get, to it's ripe, let's pick it. And I think that has changed, and I think there may be a little pulling back. I also think that some of the things that Ed was referring to about getting in a situation where you could actually get grapes to 28 bricks, clean plant material. I mean, in the 70s and the 80s, every vineyard in Napa Valley had a virus of some sort and was a lot slower to ripen.
Early on.
And then young vines are crazy at producing really high sugars. I mean, they're just good photosynthesizers. So I think that's maybe the advertisement for a slightly older vine, and to look at those things that are naturally kind of slowing down the sugar accumulation. And then just have in mind, when is it ripe? And certainly if you're managing 1,000 tons that you've got to get in, kind of do the analysis, the risk-reward analysis of if you wait to start picking when everything is perfectly ripe, when are you going to finish? So I think there's some practical things to consider in there too.
One of my stolen truisms is that our entire job is making important decisions with incomplete information. That's what we do every day, day in and day out. And so risk reward is the key, right? If you have Cabernet that's 23 and a half and there's a red flag warning in 6 days, you might think about picking it if you think it's ripe at 23 and a half. And if it's going to be 82 degrees for the foreseeable future, you can probably hang out and wait, right?
All right, you guys, that was fantastic, and I am so glad that we did video it. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. I just want to say, let's continue the collaboration upstairs, but also throughout the year. We offer winemaker education. We also have winemaker roundtables. We sometimes have you bring experiments to share with one another at those. Please join those. Please let us know whatever you want or need in terms of content and resources. It's our job and our honor to help you in all that you do. And again, thank you guys so much. Let's head upstairs. Let's taste some wines and have some fun and celebrate the vintage.